Hello, Awakened Beauties. Finally, it's here. The truth to empower women to true inner beauty through healthy biology. And now, here's your hostess, Cassandra Keel, your organic beauty and CBD mentor, helping you stay sane, get sleep, and bring your sexy back. Sponsored by evokebeauty.com.
Welcome to the Awaken Beauty podcast. Today, I'm going to be talking about something that has been near and dear to my heart, and this very topic awoken in my soul when I started to take my hypnotherapy training. And about halfway through the course, my incredible mentor and instructor, Dennis, had said, now, for anybody that doesn't think that they're going to have pornography come into the treatment room, then I want you to pay attention to this course. And when we went through the course, the facts, the figures, the percentages, and the incredible eye-opening experience of how many people are impacted by pornography, it's completely opened my eyes, torn the blindfold off as to how high of a detriment this costs partners, families, relationships, and our own soul and our own mind. And in fact, last weekend when I had the podcast with Dr. Lindsay Berkson, we had actually started off, before we even started the podcast, about how all of these couples in Texas are in open relationships and pornography is rampant, all the way down to young kids. And in her medical office, she sees enough men coming in with ED, erectile dysfunction, at the age of 23 and older. So this really, truly is a problem. And with that in mind, I just wanted to kind of read through some information in an article that I found that was really, really great and clarifying. And I've done previous episodes around meditation and about the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala hijack. So this kind of coincides with that. But really the intent is to just bring forth information and awaken you to something you may not have been aware of. Maybe you're impacted by it or know somebody that is. And so really it's about understanding the creation, the complications, and the management of really any addictive surges that we have in our life. So the purpose of this article really is threefold. It's to gain a better understanding of how an addiction is created by learning about our brains and the neuroscience of what addiction really is. And the next, number 2, is to conceptualize the complications, really the chaos and the damage, the extreme damage that is caused when we overstimulate our brains. Now, this could be pornography, this could be your phone, this could be your email, it could be many things, food, numbing out to the television. And then third is to explain the powerful skills that can be used to manage these compulsions or addictions of any type. So this information really is particularly applicable to everything from sexual issues, but it's also really relevant to understanding the many different types of addictions and how they work in the brain. So starting off, our brain has 2 parts. There are 2 significant parts of the brain that correlate with the creation of most addictions, and this is first the prefrontal cortex, and second is the limbic system. So the prefrontal cortex is part of the brain just inside the forehead. This is a part of the brain that we call where basically our higher functions are located, where we actually analytically think. So in hypnotherapy, we call this, this filter, this critical factor filter, that thoughts and things go through the brain. And usually what we want to do is think about them. We want to think about our thoughts. So this higher function is pretty much composed of all your morals, your moral reasonings, your rational thoughts, Again, like I said, when you're logically thinking, and your values, and if they right or true for you, and caring about relationships, guilt, remorse, and all these different consequences that we filter through our brain. And then another part is the limbic system, and this is located in the center of the head. So moving a little bit further back from the forehead area. And this is the primary objective of this system, is to really just keep us alive, keep us breathing. So it is the source of all of these instinctive pieces of our body and how it's connected to our brain. So really you could say it's our survival instincts. And it's our innate desire to procreate. So a distinguishing difference between the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex is that the limbic system does its job by means of all of the feelings and the emotions. And like I said, these instincts that just pop out of us or trigger out of us. And it does not have the capacity to think. Okay, so it's really important to understand where these things come from. So because it does not think like the prefrontal cortex does, there is no shame. There's no guilt. There's no morale. And there's no values that are associated with the limbic system. It is what it is. And it is not immoral, rather amoral, but it is void of any moral reasoning, of any kind of thinking. So some suggest that even 90 to 95% of our behavior is actually prompted by the limbic region of the brain. So what is another word that we can call the limbic region? The subconscious. So now tying all that together, when you feel something come up or you have a reaction or you say my mind has a mind of its own, that is the subconscious. That's the subconscious that we know now in neuroplasticity that makes up almost 90% of our everyday interactions. So, in other words, if you've ever seen the visual, our behavior is driven by our subconscious limbic emotions that, like an iceberg, if you can pretend and imagine the iceberg just tipping out of the top of the water, are predominantly underwater, or, like I said, the subconscious. So just that tiny little bit, 10% is that iceberg on the top, and the rest is all underneath. So these two parts of our brain work in concert with each other. And the balance between these two different regions has an immense impact on the quality of our life, how we think, how we act, how we treat others, and how we treat ourselves. And much of the time, if you're confused or frustrated, it really can feel like a tug of war. And it can feel like what we think is right, and it's something inside us just kind of tugs and pulls us into the other direction. And what we feel like doing, again, pulling in that other direction, is just this really intricate battle between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system, the subconscious part of our brain. So our thoughts really are about what we think is right or wrong, originating from the prefrontal thinking analytical part of the brain, and is usually easy to identify. But however, this is the issue, is that it's often more difficult to determine the exact origin of those very, very strong but subconscious emotional surges. So again, we've got the prefrontal analytical part of the brain, which is all of our higher functions. And then we've got the limbic, which is our subconscious. And when you're emotional, how do you think you're going to react? You're going to be in the moment, pulling onto those emotions, and what happens. And that's when you say, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to say that. It just came out of me. That is the subconscious part of the body. So we call this the prefrontal hijack. So any stress or feeling, just any feeling that activates that limbic part of the alarm system, which is your subconscious, if the stress is severe enough, the limbic system actually shuts down the prefrontal cortex function, creating a scenario that make the survival need the absolute priority. So it's so strong, that alarm, that parasympathetic alarm is so strong that it actually shuts down your prefrontal cortex. Pretty amazing. So for example, if somebody is holding your head underneath the water trying to kill you, the limbic system will go on high alert and activate and immediately shut down into that prefrontal functioning area and want to absolutely do anything that it can to survive. So when this happens, that moral reasoning disappears and the breath of air becomes absolute priority, and you'll do anything to get it. So in that moment, you are not worried about what you're going to eat for lunch, if you should or shouldn't say it, and if you're going to be late for work, because it just happens. Your only focus is that desperate need to get a breath of air. Now, equate that breath of air to anything. If you've ever had an addiction or an urge or a surge to do something in your life, that's what's happening. So with the prefrontal functions, when they're shut down, you will do whatever it takes to get a breath. And if you had a knife in your hand, you'd probably stab the guy. I know I would. So if you didn't have a knife, you would pop him in the nose, pull his hair out, dig his eyes out. You do anything you can to get a breath of air. So without prefrontal functions, most people will do whatever is necessary to get that breath of air. Breath of, you put your thing in there. So this life-giving limbic system process, which is spirit-derived, which is critical for our basically human life to survive, is powerful, it's persistent, and it is absolutely dominant. So moving on, addictions. So how are addictions created? So basically in the brain, there are several million receptors and receivers and connections that we actually call synapses, or we have these synaptic gaps. And the communication through this synapse is actually facilitated by neurotransmitters or neurochemicals. Talked a lot about cannabis and CBD on this podcast, and these are the very things that are endocannabinoids and then phytocannabinoids actually trigger and can be an antagonist to calm them down or make them communicate better. So when these neurotransmitters and the synapses, these two chemicals, are associated with addictions, this basically taps into a dopamine and glutamate issue. So dopamine is the pleasure chemical, and glutamate is a memory chemical. So when dopamine helps facilitate that feeling of whatever pleasure it is, whether it's pornography, food, or a trip to Disneyland, glutamate creates a memory that, let's say, Disneyland, which sounds a little bit more appropriate, was a source of pleasure. So again, dopamine helps facilitate the feeling, and glutamate creates the memory. And when we eat something really delicious, dopamine gives us that feeling of satisfaction, and then glutamate again reminds us of the source of satisfaction. So functionally, these two chemicals are wonderful. They work hand in hand to create the joy in our life, the joy memories, and play an important part, an important role of creating this passion and that underlying drive and motivation to work hard and study diligently and be that athlete that you so want to be and run 2 more miles on that treadmill at boot camp. It just sticks with the task. So as long as these two beautiful neurochemicals are dispersed in appropriate amounts, dopamine helps us feel connected. It helps us feel happy, satisfied, and glutamate just helps our mind, body, and spirit about what that source was. What was that satisfying feeling? All right. So here's the however. If the limbic system receives a consistent overstimulation, flash flood warnings, all times of these very chemicals, it eventually creates a switch in our limbic system's priority list. So when the switch in the limbic system happens, the need for the stimulation can become more important than our needs for survival. And the result of this switch is what we call an addiction, unfortunately. So when the priority of the limbic system switches, the need for stimulation becomes more important than the need for survival. Consequently, the need for stimulation is felt as urgently and intensely as if you've gone without drinking water for 2 days or without eating for 2 weeks. So, in response to these intense feelings, and as an attempt to get what the limbic system feels you need, the limbic system actually shuts down the prefrontal functioning, as we've talked about prior in this podcast, and creates something like a one-man, lovely, hellish tug of war, with the limbic system pulling in one direction and no prefrontal pulling in the opposite direction. So what does the addictive behavior look like? So a hungry old man walks into a grocery store with just enough money to purchase food to keep him alive. However, after noticing the cigarettes behind the counter, he buys cigarettes with what little money he has rather than buying the beautiful, lovely, nourishing food for his absolute great old man bod. So why? Because the need for the nicotine stimulation has become so much more powerful than the need of survival. That's what you end up with. So a group of men huddle around a tin can fire late at night in 12-degree weather, waiting for an arrival of their preferred drug. Why? Because the anticipated drug stimulation is more important than being in a warm house with a roof over your head and a family to come home to. Or an elderly widow in a gambling casino is wasting away her life savings. And I grew up on the Lower Sioux, upper part of the reservation, and I saw this day in and day out growing up, and I thought, how sad. I don't understand how this works. Well, the gambling trance is a powerful one. It is an absolute trance. And so why does this happen? Because the stimulating thought of money is more important than her actual survival of keeping a savings account. Additionally, her prefrontal cortex has been shut down and she is not thinking rationally. She will likely feel terrible tomorrow, but in that moment, the stimulation she seeks is more important than anything else. So, in summary, we create addictions by overstimulating our limbic system, our subconscious. And it's done through this incredible experience between our dopamine and glutamate receptors that are made to create experiences in our life and to remind us of the joy in our life and to bring us back to those times of joy. But the overstimulation of our limbic system creates a switch in the limbic priority system. So when stimulation becomes more important than survival, we have an addiction. So what are some other complications from overstimulating? We have received many warnings about the dangers of pornography. So moving into the very topic I started with, here are some other consequences of overstimulating our brains. These complicating effects can happen with each and every flash flood warning. The prefrontal functions are hijacked, creating this scenario of the one-man tug of war, and the limbic system is pulling one direction with no resistance pulling in the other. So you lose that moral reasoning in that correct and right and true direction for yourself. Next, the stimulation becomes as important as survival. So the body doesn't know the difference between, well, what are my true needs right now? What do I really need right now versus just getting the one hit wonder. And it raises the pleasure thermostat and creates a greater disparity between the current behavior and our ability to feel true and meaningful pleasure. The higher the pleasure thermostat, the more difficult it is to feel happy. This, my dear friends, is why we have so much depression. Now, call it what you may, whether it's grabbing for your phone or not getting enough hits of love from your husband or not getting enough attention at work. They're constant hits of seek of approval that creates these large gaps in our brain, and we don't know what happiness is anymore, and we surely can't feel it in ourselves. So it creates the gap called depression. And then we have damages in our it damages our neural pathways, which is basically the condition that fits the medical model for brain disease and Alzheimer's and many more issues. And it also damages our relationships. The shame and the guilt associated with these floods of our brain, and we just feel like we can't stop, but we can, will often just sever the closeness, the connection that we feel with others. We can't be present because we're flooded with shame. And this disconnect is so counterproductive to human happiness and what is going on as a society today, that it is breaking down communities, relationships, and mankind. And these events, these transactions are just deeply, deeply embedded in our memory, in which we call the subconscious. So how do we fight the limbic system? Okay, so let's talk about that futile fight. So when we get pounced on by a massive wave of temptation or an addiction surge, we simply instinctively just clench our fists, grit our teeth, and desperately try, show our value, and just fight every craving and urge. Well, I don't know how well that's been for you in your life, but it's probably not been the best in my life. You can have all the will that you want. But my opinion is that fighting this limbic system, because it's pervasively persistent in its power, is like getting into a limbic boxing ring with frickin' Mike Tyson. He will knock you out, and he will beat our face in and bite our ear off, but we will not win the boxing match. Fighting the limbic system is like fighting a limbic army of, I don't even know what to tell you. Something so big that you can't even imagine, and trying to fight it with a freaking squirt gun. So furthermore, the limbic fight could be compared to basically maintaining the fighting stance of a wave. The first few waves on a hot summer day might feel good, but the waves come at every 10 seconds, day and night, simply feel like we're drowning. And eventually, if we maintain a fighting stance, and waves will just wear us out. So what can we do? We learn how to surrender. We give up the fight with our limbic system. And surrendering is not what I mean by the word surrender, maybe in the dictionary. It does not imply giving into the limbic system cravings, rather giving up the fight with them. What you resist will persist. So we get out of the boxing ring as quickly as we can, and we raise a white flag in the face of the limbic enemy, and we learn how to surf the surges rather than attempting to validate them and fight the waves. And my personal hypnotherapy, therapeutic experience has truly taught me that those who learn how to surrender rather than keep fighting them experience so much more success. So the alternative to fighting could look many ways. And hypnotherapy really is this beautiful experience of calmly and relaxingly bringing you down into a very, very hypnotic trance that is simply almost like a meditation. And when your mind and your breath and your body slow its frequency down, it's better able to allow that guard dog that limbic system that we're talking about, always trying to protect you and keep you safe, it allows it to relax. It allows it to let down and allows that limbic system and the prefrontal cortex to connect. And when these two systems are able to connect, they can see each other eye to eye. They can see where something may have stemmed. They can really endure the beautiful goodness of a situation and really see clearly how it got off path. And we really start to identify the root causes of pieces. And then we're also able to bring the analytical mind and the moral mind and our value mind back into the room with love and forgiveness and patience, but also truth. And so instead of being double-minded, and having this confliction all the time and feeling frustrated, the mind is able to become single-minded. You become conscious in your life and you're able to slow things down. And when those surges come, you actually start to analytically think again, is that right and true for me? Or do I want to let that in? So when you become conscious, you become more aware of how you're present with people, and you become more present with people because you become more present in using your brain and thinking how you think. And it's an incredible gift when you're able to slow yourself down, create maybe a self-hypnosis, maybe it's a meditation for you to just continue to use these different skill sets, bringing that urge and that surge of that limbic system that's so fervent in us and that runs 90% of our life to actually start melting that water down the top of that iceberg and becoming more conscious in your life, give you more freedom, more control, and more confidence that you can break an addiction and that you want to break the addiction. You become ready. Change isn't hard, but you have to be ready. And so I hope that this explained a little bit about the limbic system and what the subconscious does when we are in these constant fight or flight. We just get burnt out and the brain is on fire. And we don't give ourselves much of a chance to turn our lives around, to understand why we're doing what we're doing, but it is absolutely possible. And for anybody that's not tried hypnotherapy, please do reach out to me. I would love to discuss about the benefits. It certainly is not putting you to sleep and telling you what to do. You're in control the entire time. It's a beautiful, incredible experience. It's very healing, and it is momentous. It's fast, and it lasts as long as you're willing to do the work. So thanks for just following along with me on the Awaken Beauty podcast about addictions. And if you or somebody you know does struggle from addictions or pornography in general, please do reach out to me. I'd be happy to refer you or work with you and give you more tools and resources on how this is destructing, especially our young minds. These young kids' soul is just really taking over this prefrontal cortex, this high functioning system, burning it out, tearing it down when they should be developing and becoming beautiful young human beings that are inquisitive, honorable, with knowledge that helps them propel in the future and doesn't tear them down. So that's all, my dear ones. Thank you for following the Awaken Beauty podcast. Make sure that you go ahead and like and subscribe to any podcast platform that you love. Leave me a note, what popped out to you on this podcast episode, and we'll talk to you soon.
Hello, Awaken Beauties. Thank you for joining Cassandra today. Were you inspired to bring your sexy back? Please like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Interested in high-quality natural products for your hair, skin, and wellness? Please visit evoquebeauty.com. Again, that's evoquebeauty.com. EVOQ beauty.com. Until next time, stay sane, get sleep, and bring your sexy back.